Well, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Leggett proposes $50 million in budget cuts. Hogan reduces funding for Baltimore. Is this a political payback? Delegate arrested for indecent exposure, and Obama pledges to integrate wealthy neighborhoods. How's that going to work? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former executive director of the Maryland Democratic Party and political strategist, Rich Parsons. Former chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, Mark Unkefer, and Republican strategist, Phil Bell. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Earlier predictions of a robust economy in recovery have now proven false, as County Executive Isaiah Leggett was forced to admit when he notified the County Council that tax revenue from the state was going to be $21.4 million below estimates, and he is forced to propose $50 million in cuts to this year's budget. Now, Rich, the cuts requested by the executive are relatively minor in nature, but doesn't this underscore the overall weakness in the business community and the need for the politicians to take a realistic look at our economic growth?
Well, they're not going to have much of a choice, Casey. What it really points to is a weakness in economic recovery and economic activity. Job growth in this county has been flat ever since even before the recession. It was flat. We just haven't come out of the recession because we're not doing the kind of things that encourage job growth and a vital economy. And we're kind of unique. The rest of the region has turned the corner. Montgomery County is doing some big things wrong.
But it's not just that we haven't come out of the corner. The county council continues to impose regulations and costs on top of business every time we turn around.
Right. Every other jurisdiction in this region has moved to positive job growth annually for the last couple of years. We haven't, and I think part of the answer is we're not investing in infrastructure the way we should, and traffic congestion is a real brake on the economy here. The second thing is exactly what you said. When you pass a mandatory sick leave bill that affects every business owner in the county, that doesn't exactly send, I mean, there may be reasons for it for your workforce or whatever, but the collateral damage is that you've sent another negative message about doing business in Montgomery County, and enough of those messages have built up that it's really, we're not having the kind of vibrant economic growth that provides the revenue you need to support the kind of county services we're used to. The only alternative they're going to have is to find more and more cuts as we go forward, unless they start changing their direction.
Well, let's talk about that, Mark, because it doesn't seem to be in the DNA of this county council under the leadership of George Leventhal to cut back on anything. What do you think?
Sure. Let's talk about the cuts of the council. The council's salary would be a good place to start. They do about $125,000 a year. That's more than every state legislator in the entire country. That's roughly 3 times the pay of our own state legislature. It sets a horrible, it's not a lot of money, but it sets a horrible example for the county workforce, because they say, well, why should we take cutbacks when you guys are so overpaid relative to other people with the similar positions?
Phil, Governor Hogan rode to victory on a pledge to rein in spending. Has anyone else learned that message, or is this something that's going to carry him to victory when he runs for re-election?
I think a few people started to learn the message. In fact, the county executive's kind of seeing that and imposing these cuts, which is important. But the good thing that this brings about is it's a great opportunity for government at all levels to revisit how certain things are done. For a very long time, every government has said, look, we have to do X, Y, and Z. And they haven't really investigated how is it done. Is there ways we can have agencies work together to improve these services? So this is a good opportunity for those who absolutely do care about what the role of government is and what they're supposed to provide to say, hey, perhaps we could consolidate some of these libraries under Montgomery College or otherwise to streamline costs, bring things down, and make it so that government doesn't impose such a heavy burden on people, either at the state level or the local level here in Montgomery.
Rich, is that one of the problems is that there's really no identifiable pro-business council member?
That, I wouldn't say there's a lot of pro-business legislators in this county at all, at any level. But I think some of the things, getting back to Phil's point, some of the things we can do to improve the business climate here don't cost money. They involve streamlining processes and getting to answers quicker and having more certainty in development review processes and applications for various permits. Those kind of things can really have a material benefit, and they don't cost money. It has to do with leadership and attitudes and being open and friendly to
Oh,
business.
but
We're
I
starting
know-
to see
I
it,
know
frankly,
that
but the question is why now? Why not 10 years ago?
Touts the fact that they're now, streamlined.
They're making some
Everything
progress.
Can be,
They're making progress, but the question is that should have been happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Why are we waiting until now? We need to be doing a lot more of that, but there needs to be a culture shift. We need to be unambiguous about the fact that we want jobs and businesses to grow here. We want people to do well and have higher incomes, and we want to be the kind of place that welcomes investment. And I don't think we've gone far enough in any of those directions. And a lot of it's just attitude.
Mark, wrap it up for us.
I was going to say, because the alternative is we're going to continue being more and more of a bedroom community for Virginia, because that's where the jobs in the regions have been moving.
Yeah, a bedroom community with no
Well,
way to get there.
that's the argument.
It's not
that
a winning
we're gonna
strategy.
We're going to be talking about this argument for a long time.
Yeah.
Montgomery County versus Fairfax. It's a never-ending story. Now, not surprisingly, the rioting, looting, and destruction of Baltimore in May has proven costly to the city, and Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake is begging anyone who will listen for a handout, for a little bit of aid. One who apparently is not listening is Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, whose recent decision not to fund the Baltimore Red Line is allegedly caused a rift with the city leaders. Rich, this is always a chicken and an egg situation. Which came first, the rift or the lack of funding?
Well, I think you saw some friction during the riots with both the governor and the mayor kind of frustrated with each other in the initial response, and there was some blame shifting going back and forth. So you saw a little bit of a rift before, but I think getting to the Red Line, if it were a worthwhile project that actually was cost effective and could have been permitted and funded by the federal government, you compare it to the Purple Line, and there's no comparison at all. The Purple Line always had a medium-high rating from the Federal Transit Administration, which is kind of the sweet spot for things that you actually want to get federal funding for. The Red Line needed to hit that mark, and it never did. It never got anywhere close to the mark that it would have actually had to get to in terms of ridership to justify any federal dollars. So I don't think the Red Line was ever going to get built in the first place, and I actually give Hogan credit for canceling that and putting the money into the Purple Line, which is a much better
project. Isn't there a political
project.
story here? And I want to go to Phil on this. Phil, isn't there a sense that Marylanders are just tired of paying for Baltimore's mistakes?
Yeah, there's actually two separate things here. The first is absolutely. There's no question you could really say what state is there where one city just takes up so much of the air and the bandwidth for an entire state. This is the only one that I can think of. But second, when you're looking at the Red Line itself, you really got to ask, what is the point of the way some of these transit projects are done? Light rail is just a streetcar. It's inexpensive, it's cheap, it gets people from point A to point B. It should never be as involved as what was being proposed with the Red Lines. There's no question that shouldn't continue. But absolutely, this is a step in the right direction for the people and for Baltimore.
Mark, will Hogan give more aid to Baltimore anytime soon?
When do we stop ever giving aid? It just continues on. But let me come back to, we'd have to take the whole show to go through all the aid that goes into Baltimore, but just in the area of transportation, whereas Fairfax revenue with Metro here in Washington gets about 60%, it's down in the 20s with Baltimore. Baltimore is not sustaining public transportation, mass transit, and it's coming back for more support from the state. It doesn't make sense.
Well, what I've heard about some of the transportation, that they have free buses that run and compete with the city bus line, which is paid.
Yeah,
it seems counterintuitive.
There's also about 20,000 public employees who have free passes on all the trains, and that knocks the heck out of their revenue picture in their fare box. They've got major problems on transportation for sure, and we're subsidizing the wrong things, I would argue. There's real needs in Baltimore. They've got drug problems, social problems that really do need investment, opportunities, job training, better education systems. All those things are expensive to run. And I think other states, Chicago certainly takes up a lot of, we're not the only one. Chicago takes up a lot of
we
that.
hear a lot of talk from the mayor and the city leaders about doing all those things, but we never see any actions and we never see any programs. This is a city that's been mismanaged for 60 years.
Well, you could say that. I'm not an expert on Baltimore's fiscal management. I think they have done some things right, and I think there's great potential in a city like Baltimore. And Baltimore is important to the economy of the state, no doubt. And I think investing in the right things in Baltimore, I don't think the Red Line was ever one of those things, but I think there's some other things we should be doing to help Baltimore, because if we can get Baltimore to pull its own weight a little bit
but
more,
how do you
it
solve
wouldn't have
some
to
of
be
these
such a
endemic
drain going forward.
problems that are associated with Baltimore? I mean, this is the age-old story. Whether it's Cleveland, Baltimore, Detroit,
Look,
you name the city.
Casey,
How do you
I grew
solve
up in
these
a town.
endemic
I grew up
problems?
in a town with 25% unemployment. Okay, all the mills were shutting down in rural New England, and the best social program I've ever seen is a job.
Right.
Come in, create an environment where people want to invest, where you've got a workforce that's trained and educated and has the language skills and the workforce skills to be a more productive part of the workforce, and people will rise to that opportunity, and investors will invest, and you can get out of the doldrums. I think this whole state needs to really take a hard look at what we're doing to attract and retain businesses, and really start investing and stop all the finger pointing and start actually thinking strategically about what it takes to make Maryland more competitive and get the economy going in, and that creates a whole bunch of revenue, so we don't have to have all these fiscal problems.
So,
all the
but I
time.
mean,
Rich,
let's
you're
get back.
right,
Let's get
but-
back to the lead question. The lead question is: this just political payback by a Republican governor to a jurisdiction that didn't vote for him?
I don't think so. I think it had to do with the project.
Mark.
I agree. I think it has to do with the project, again, you look at it in the totality of the support that Baltimore gets. The requests never stop there, and there is already existing
But
support.
is this a good message to be sending, not only to Baltimore City, but also to the rest of the jurisdictions, that there's a new sheriff in town, he's not going to just waste money?
Well, I don't think it's a question of
Wrap it up.
being a new sheriff, but it does go to a little bit of what Rich says. Baltimore and all the jurisdictions need to stand on their own so that they can grow, so that jobs can be created there, and it's not going to depend on whoever's in the corner office in Annapolis year to year.
All right, Phil, you got the last word. When we come back from this short break, why is a Democratic House of Delegate member charged with indecent exposure? And President Obama wants to pick your neighbors. What do you think about that? Stay tuned. And welcome back. This week, amongst the reports that former Obama aide Will Jawando raised $112,000 in his race, and Jamie Raskin raised $553,000 in his race, when out of the blue, the political grapevines had something new to talk about, and it caused a lot of political chatter. When it was learned that House of Delegate member Ariana Kelly was arrested for indecent exposure after a domestic incident involving her ex-husband. Now, there's no need to repeat the details of the incident, other than to report the fact that Ms. Kelly was arrested after arguing with her ex-husband, from whom she was divorced last year. Rich, does this kill her political career?
Well, I don't know, Casey. I think when the facts come out and we see kind of what happens in the legal environment and if there's any charges that end up sticking, and I think we don't know enough yet about how damaging this is going to be to her. It certainly doesn't help to have this kind of coverage. I heard that this story got covered in the London Daily News even. So, I mean, it's out there, and she certainly lost the London vote. But whether this hurts her back home, how many people are paying attention, we'll see. This is usually a tough kind of thing to survive as a politician.
Mark, she ran two very good races. She won in a very highly contested race on her first term. So, what do you make of this? Is this going to impact her career?
It's hard to say. I think a lot of times there are people on both sides, both parties have had these issues with marital upsets, marital problems that have triggered it. And by and large, it does not help careers. It's not necessarily fatal, but it may keep them from continuing on to go to higher office and as more people. But I agree with Rich. We'll see more of the details going forward.
I'd rather spend time talking about the amount of money that candidates are raising in their competitive races. It seems that there are some good stories out there. Certainly, with Kathleen Matthews reporting that she's raised money, all the races are very competitive. What do you think?
One you didn't mention, Casey, that's very interesting that spans both Montgomery and Prince George's is the 4th Congressional District. Glenn Ivey there has opened up a pretty substantial lead, not only in this quarter, but in the previous quarter, over 400,000, I believe, in both. So, I mean, he's really stepped out and has really hit his marks in terms of the fundraising.
Well, but ironically, there was a major article in the Baltimore Sun about former Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown and how well he's doing in that same race.
Right.
So So
It's interesting. We've got two very crowded fields here vying for these two open seats, and it's going to be a real interesting race. But you're seeing, in the financial reports, you're seeing some differences emerge. Raskin's fundraising total was quite impressive.
What are we seeing in that race to replace Van Hollen? I mean, I know we're talking about the Democratic primary,
Sure.
and you guys have a handicap in admitting anyone is a good candidate. But what are we seeing in that race that is attractive?
Well, on the Republican side, Frank Howard has been talking about taking it. Some other folks have been looking at the race as well. So I expect that'll be competitive. The Republican candidate who ran last time was outspent 100-1 and got 40% of the vote, which comes close to the threshold at which you begin to consider the race. District 6, I think, will be another active race. You've got a candidate, the incumbent got less than 50% of the vote. A swing of 1,500 votes would have done it. So we're going to have a lot of very active congressional races in Maryland next year.
But you're going to have a different race, won't
Yeah.
you, Phil, if Glenn Ivey is the candidate, not Donna Edwards?
It'll definitely be a different race if it's Glenn Ivey. But I think the one thing that we're all missing when we're talking about fundraising, we're talking about who these candidates are, is how really poorly the districts are drawn and how they go just
Yes.
about everywhere.
Yeah.
Think about where the 4th district goes, where the 8th district goes, where the 6th district goes.
Look at the third. The third is the worst of them all.
And we're talking about how many candidates come from Montgomery County when those districts cover so much more of the state and the interests are so diffused.
One of the interesting things about the Van Hollen seat is the way it was redistricted. It is a bit more competitive than it used to be. It's still got a majority of Democrats, but there's some good Democratic candidates running for that seat. Raskin, Kumar Barve is a big name in this part of the county and seems to be doing well in addition. So I think there's going to be a lot of interest in both of these races.
We'll watch it as the summer. I mean, the summertime is when the fundraisers are all in thrall. So we'll keep tuned and watch the race as they develop over the summer. Now, for more than a year, almost 2 years, in fact, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has been working on a rulemaking that would require local communities to review the racial and socioeconomic makeup of the community, report the results to the federal government. Now, such reporting in itself is not that alarming, since the decennial census that's taken effectively does the same thing. However, the proposed rulemaking would permit HUD to withhold funding from communities if the communities themselves fail to set and meet goals for re-engineering the makeup of the community. Mark, it remains unclear how the federal government will force communities to integrate, but last weekend President Obama emphatically stated he wants the federal government to integrate races into wealthy neighborhoods. What do you make of that suggestion?
Well, and let's be clear, we're not talking about racial discrimination per se, as we are talking about economic integration, of not having neighborhoods that are sort of all of one particular economic class and changing that dynamic. Surely we've kind of all agreed, certainly in Montgomery County, there is not an issue of racial discrimination. If you look at the whole region, collectively we're all much more integrated than we were a couple generations ago.
They're not saying there's redlining going on, but they're saying there's de facto redlining.
Well, it's
because certain neighborhoods are overwhelmingly populated by certain minorities.
And it tends to be, I mean, the lines of demarcation tend to be economic, based on who can afford to live where.
Rich, back in the 70s, the government tried to engage in forced busing in a similar attempt to integrate schools and neighborhoods, and it proved to be wildly unpopular.
Right.
In fact, some think it caused a conservative backlash. And so are we looking at the same type of situation of overreach by the federal government?
Well, I think it is an overreach by the federal government, and I, like you, Casey, I'm not sure exactly how they're going to address this. But having the data probably doesn't hurt. But here in Montgomery County, one of the important things is, we have for years had policies that located affordable housing or below market, workforce housing, the below market rate units, scattered throughout various places in the county. So we've always had policies for the last 30 years at least that have really tried to integrate this county economically more than you see in many other communities around America. So I think what you see in a place like Montgomery County is a little bit less of this effect than maybe some other places. And here I think it's been fairly successful, never perfect, but we do have a fair amount of economic integration in most of the areas of this county, and that's a good thing. That's one of our strong points. I don't know how the federal government's going to use HUD to leverage a place maybe like parts of Potomac that are very exclusively upper income.
I don't know how
that's going to work.
I don't know how a community, and Phil, help me here. How can a community set a goal to integrate when they're mature communities and they're not allowing any increased development or density in those communities?
Well, it's simple, you don't. What I'd like to go back to is what Rich said earlier, the best form of social program is a job. Well, if there's a question about, within the Obama administration about some of these neighborhoods not quote unquote being integrated, well, they should be helping to create the environment where jobs are created and people can go up the economic ladder and afford to purchase homes there. That is what promotes integration, people moving around, and you're already able to do it. The only barrier is your ability to afford it. The harder you work, the better the job you have, the more your ability to start a business. That's what takes you from being in an inner city portion of Montgomery County to a large home in Potomac, and that's the way it should be. This is some place where the government has no business being. It's another example of the type of overreach we've continued to see from this administration, and hopefully voters will say, hey, wait a second, I earned my way in. Other people can earn their way in here too, and that's the program that we should be fostering.
But getting back to what the administration is proposing, it's because there's de facto racism.
It's not de facto racism. I'll give you an example. Back in the 1960s, my uncle, who obviously is black, he had the opportunity to move into a very majority white town. Now, ultimately didn't take it. He decided to go someplace else. He had the money, he had the ability, he had purchased the home. That's what he did. Now, just like you could do it in the 1960s, you could do it in 2015. The only difference is, do you have the money to do that? Now, the more that we get away from the idea of there's discrimination or that there's some form of de facto discrimination or otherwise holding you back, and you improve yourself individually, you'll get to those places.
But I think we all will agree that Montgomery County is unique in its racial composition and also its racial relations. But not all the world, or not all of Maryland, is like that. And so, isn't this a worthy objective that the president and the federal government should spend time on?
Well, one of the interesting things of what HUD has been looking at in this plan is to end or limit restrictive zoning, where you have a minimum number of acres that you are allowed to have, because that's been the strategy, arguably, that in Westchester County or various other counties that they've done to have this kind of economic discrimination, these large plots of land. And it's perverse, despite the history in Montgomery County, we actually have that, not for that purpose, in the agricultural reserve, which has in effect minimum 25-acre zonings with exceptions and carve-outs. So it's really kind of perverse the way that this particular policy could interfere with the way the county already zones itself.
Well, we're going to have to wrap this up, but I think this is actually, I think the analogy with, of course, I made it because I like it, right? With forced busing, this is going to be a weakness in the Democratic platform if it's pushed to its logical end. Stay tuned when we come back from this short break for Parting Shots. And welcome back. Now with Parting Shots, Mark Unkefer.
Well, in the last month we've lost the Gazette, so we have less media available. So I thought it'd be appropriate to do a shout out to a reporter who has done an absolutely wonderful job. Bill Turk of the Washington Post has been covering much of the Maryland area. He is a former Newsweek White House correspondent. And Bill has done a great job. He's the one who broke the Ariana Kelly story, and he's also been doing a great job on the Silver Spring Transit Center. He's a guy who actually breaks stories.
Thank you, Mark. Rich Parsons.
Well, I think he's going to be a busy guy. There's a lot of stories that the Gazette used to cover here, especially on the transportation issue, which I've noticed Bill Turk has actually been getting into. Not just the transit center, but there's big action here in the county on the issue of bus rapid transit. A task force continues to meet and will continue to meet over the summer to hone various proposals. And the county is looking at some big choices and some big options. The county executive put forward what's called an Independent Transit Authority bill, which crashed like a lead balloon in the last session, ran into a buzzsaw of opposition. And he's come back and asked this task force to see if we can come up with something better. There are some better ideas. Focusing it more on proven projects like the CCT is one set of alternatives. And another is to broaden it, and we're hoping to see some action this fall.
Phil, you're just going to have to wrap it up as we go out the door because we've got about 10 seconds.
All right, I just want to say it was nice to see the All-Star game on. Sad to see that Nolan Ryan was not one of the top 4 greatest players living in history. It's a travesty.
Well, thank you, panel. Thank you for being here. Thank you, audience, for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest-hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.